Let's talk more about the Fed, right? Because the focus on tamping down interest rates could potentially risk ignoring other options that the Fed has to control inflation through the money supply. That's according to our next guest, who says a narrow focus could hobble efforts, and he's calling for a more comprehensive view. Joining us now with more is Steve Hanke, Johns Hopkins University professor of applied economics. Mr. Hanke, thank you so much for being here. So talk to us about what you think the Fed is missing here and what perhaps it should be doing that it is not.
Julie, I think, good to be with you. I think the best way to start is to look at the picture this way. The beginning, February 2020, COVID hits, and the Fed presses on the metal and increases the money supply at a very rapid rate, unprecedented rate. And people have to keep in mind that there's never been a sustained inflation in the world unless there has been a significant increase in the money supply prior to that inflation hitting. And that's just what happened in the United States. Since February 2020, the money supply has been growing at about 3 times the rate that it would normally be growing at if the Fed wanted to hit its 2% inflation target. And that's why we have 8.5% inflation. We actually had a top number of 9.1 a couple of months ago. So that's the background. Now, the Fed chairman and the Fed governors have not been looking at the money supply. They've been trying to convince us that inflation is caused by something else besides growth in the money supply. You mentioned transitory. Remember those supply chain shocks and Putin and oil prices and this and that, everything under the sun but money. And actually, Chairman Powell did testify before Congress indicating that the money supply really didn't have any connection with economic activity. So that's the background. And still, even in his Jackson Hole speech, Chairman Powell never admitted that he understood where inflation was coming from, and he never mentioned the money supply. So that's where we're at right now. And by the way, John Greenwood and I in the Wall Street Journal a year ago, a little over a year ago now, indicated that inflation, based on the quantity theory of money, that model, looking at the money supply, would be between 6% and maybe as high as 9%. Well, we hit the bullseye with that. And using the same model, where are we going? This year, we will end the end of this year at 6 to 8% inflation. And next year, we'll still be up there at 5%. So that's where we're going.
Steve, let me ask you, I'm looking, if we're looking at M2 and the growth, I noticed that it peaked at about 27% year over year in February of last year. So 18 months later, we are now down to 5%. So 27 to 5% seems like a pretty big drop. Is there some transmission effect that you don't expect inflation to come down below a certain percentage by the end of this year, next year? What's going on? What is it going to take to see a transmission such that inflation reaches the Fed's goal here of 2%?
Well, this is the key question. The transmission mechanism is as follows. If the money supply changes, there's a lag between the change in the money supply and inflation. And this lag is long and variable. It lasts about 12 to 24 months. Sometimes it can stretch out actually to 3 years. So what we have had is this huge increase in the money supply. And the way I like to look at it is think of a bathtub, a monetary bathtub. So the money goes in the bathtub, and the money supply has increased since February of 2020 by about 31%. So that money goes in. Now, some normally drains out of 2 drains. One is money is needed to accommodate real economic growth and activity. So that drains some of it out. And then you have another drain that accommodates the increased demand for money. As the economy grows, people demand more money. So those drains have drained some of that 31% out, but you're left with about 20% still in the bathtub. And where does that go? that is what drains out in this transmission mechanism, Brian, into inflation. And it takes a while for it to go out. And as I say, the transmission and the lags are long and variable. So this is going to be with us no matter what the Fed does. That overflow that's in the tub already will come out in inflation. And that's why you can't turn a switch on and just bang, inflation is gone, because they've reduced the money supply.
So
now you've mentioned, by the way, that the money supply has gone down dramatically. Now this gets to my next point, the next critical point. Actually, the last 5 months has seen no growth in the money supply, no growth in the money supply over the last 5 months. That means that we will have, I think, a whopper of a recession coming next year. And the reason for that is that the Fed is not looking and not cognizant of this huge decline or flattening of the money supply growth. And when that happens, and they want to tighten even more with quantitative tightening, we're going to see ourselves in a good recession. So we will have the inflation, okay?
Wait, but Steve, I'm confused here because you just said a moment ago that the Fed can't do anything about this at this point, that it's sort of already, the damage is already done, right?
No, they can do something. They can do the right thing. The right thing is to get the money supply growing at what I call the golden growth rate. That's the rate that would be consistent with a 2% inflation. And that's about 5 to 6%. Instead of growing at 0, it should be growing at about 5 to 6%. And then you let the inflation just work itself out. The inflation it's got to come out, and it will come out. And the best way to do it is to stay on a glide path instead of overdoing it and giving us a recession, which I think the Fed's going to do. So why not just have a glide path and get rid of inflation by, let's say, sometime in 2024, get back to the target of 2% and avoid a whopper of a recession. We're not going to avoid the whopper. We're going to get it.
Yeah, I think that glide path is what everybody is hoping for, the soft landing. Really appreciate you stopping by. Steve Hanke, Johns Hopkins University Professor of Applied Economics. Thank you again.